Welcome to Masked Metalhead Music. Today's lesson is going to be on reading tablature. When you open up a new tab for a song that you want to learn or a PDF that I've attached that you want to practice during the week, then you're going to see a couple things, okay? For each instrument, as you can see, they're labeled on the left. I've got guitar and bass. There are two sets of lines. The top one is sheet music. It's got a treble clef or a bass clef if you're a bass player. Attached to it on the far left side, followed by a time signature, 4/4. 4/4 tells us the beats per measure, which is 4, and the note that gets the beat, which is the quarter note. So the top one corresponds to the beats per measure. If you only had 3 beats per measure, but there were still quarter notes getting the beat, then that would mean that it would be 3/4. Okay, if you had 6 beats per measure and the 8th note got the beat, then it would be 6/8. Those are both two pretty common times other than 4/4. 2/4 is another common one. So now, looking at the next set of lines, we've got some tablature down below for each. And if you look at the guitar, there are 6 lines. If you look at the bass, there's 4. And that is because a guitar has 6 strings and a bass has 4. So each of those correspond to one of the strings on your instrument. Looking at the guitar, you've got 6 zeros ascending up the page, 1 per string. The lowest line on the page is the lowest pitch on your guitar. So you're going to start with your low E and ascend up to the high E. If you're a bass player, then you have got your 4 notes that are also all opens and ascending from the lowest pitch to the highest pitch. Now these notes for guitar are E, A, D, G, B, E, and for bass, E, A, D, G, because that is what you tune your open strings to in standard tuning. Moving on to the second measure, we are starting to put numbers on each of the strings. So now we know that all of these notes are going to be on that low E string because we just learned that the bottom line for each instrument is the E string, the low E for guitar. Low E for bass too, but there's not a high E string on bass. So when we see this and we see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 0 is exactly the same. We're playing an open fret. So there's no fingers on the fretboard at all. We're just playing an open string there. And then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be 1st fret, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, and 4th fret. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all on the E string. Bass players are playing the exact same thing. So now you know what strings correspond to what lines on the tablature, and what numbers correspond to what frets on those different strings. So now let's take a look at how long you need to play each of the notes that you're reading. So if you look at measure 3, we have what you call a whole note. It has no line above it, and it's got no flag. So that's how you recognize that it's a whole note. It's just a hollow circle. And what we're going to do there is we're going to hold the note for 4 beats because we have 4 beats per measure. And if this is a whole note, then it lasts a whole measure. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're off for 4 beats because we have a whole rest in measure 4. Following both of these, we come up to half notes. Half notes are still hollow, but they have a line coming up through them. And because they're half notes, they last half of a measure when we're in 4/4, when we have 4 beats per measure. And these half notes can fit 2 per measure. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Each of them last half of the measure. Same with these half rests that are followed in measure 6. Now we're on to measure 7, and we have quarter notes. So quarter notes, 4 of them can fit in a measure. As you can notice, we're doubling the frequency of each note each time. So the first time we have 1 per measure. Then in measure 5, we had 2 per measure. In measure 7, we've got 4 per measure. So assuming that we're keeping the tempo the same, which is the heartbeat of the piece, it doesn't change unless it's notated to. You might speed up by changing the speed of notes. So you might change quarter notes to eighth notes. But the tempo there is the same. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and it just depends on how you subdivide. So starting with these quarter notes, the subdivision is 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 of them per measure. You have quarter rests in measure 8. In measure 9, we come up to eighth notes, so they're going to be 2 times as fast as the quarter notes, and 8 of them fit in a measure. Following that is eighth rests, and if you are counting and if you're subdividing eighth notes or 8 rests, you can count them 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we've added ands in between the 1, 2, 3, 4 that we counted quarter notes with. So now again we're doubling. We're going to 16th notes, and as you can guess, 16 of them fit in a whole measure. When you're subdividing these, it becomes a little bit more tricky. You're going to add an E and an A. So you've got 1 E and a. So 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. And that's how you're going to think about that in your head when you're counting them out and not playing them. When you are playing them, it's going to sound like 16 notes in a measure, or 2 times as fast as eighth notes, or 4 times as fast as quarter notes. So we're playing. Okay. Following this up, I kind of summed up the rests into one measure. So if you're looking at measure 12, we've got 4 16th rests, followed by 2 eighth rests, followed by 2 quarter rests. Now the 4 16th rests, if you can do 4 divided by 16, you come out to 1/4, so those equal an entire quarter note. If you do 2 over 8, so 2 times eighth rests, then you've got another quarter bit of rest there. And that's how you can think of these. If you look at the 16th notes back in measure 11, they're grouped in 4s. Each of these 4s with the double hats count as 1 beat. If you look back at measure 9 to the eighth notes, they're grouped in 2s, so each of those 2 count as a quarter note. Now we are up to measure 13, and we're going to start learning triplets. Okay, triplets are not quite as easy as just doing quarter, eighth, or 16th notes, or whole notes or half notes, because those kind of notes fit evenly into measures, and these fit evenly too, but it's the placement that's a little bit tricky. So if you have this first set of 3, anytime there's a 3 above it, it's a triplet. And this first set of 3 is 3 notes in 2 beats. They're quarter note triplets. These quarter note triplets last 2 beats. So if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, they'd be done after 1, 2. By the time you get to 3, you're on to the next beat. When you're playing that, you got to divide them up evenly, and it sounds like. Okay, so they've got even weight to each of them. You're not giving any of them a swing or anything, but they fit into a tighter amount of beats than what the normal notation would allow. Next, we've got eighth note triplets. So if quarter note triplets fit 3 notes into 2 beats, then eighth note triplets fit 3 notes into 1 beat. So every time when we're counting a measure and we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, then we are looking at this thing that we can fit 12 triplet eighth notes into 1 measure. So if we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, we fit 12 notes into that 1 measure there. Now, moving on to 14, we've got hammer-ons and pull-offs. So if we are looking at the hammer-on first, it's got the H underneath the tie. When you're hitting it, you want to make sure that you're using that good form that we used in the last video, where we're coming into it with the tip of our finger, the most bony part of our finger, and you're going to come straight into that string. Okay, and as soon as you start to get it to ring and you're making sure that note's not thudding out, because at first you're going to probably play a couple where it goes like, and it's just not quite hitting hard enough. You got to make sure that you're coming into that string hard and fast enough to keep it ringing. This will still ring for a while, even though I didn't pluck that string. Next, we're doing a pull-off, which has the same idea. We're plucking one note, but playing two out of it. Okay, so with our right hand, we're going to pick the 5, and then we're going to pull off that 5 to play the 3. So I didn't pick the 3, it's just this finger, which was on the 5th fret, is pulling through this string to hit that 3 below it. Now, I like to think of this as going parallel with the fretboard, and then it kind of sweeps up, so you're pulling down and through the string. You want to make sure you're not just letting it off of the string like this, because it doesn't give you as strong of a sound. You want to make sure that you're taking it and pulling through that string, that you're plucking that next note with your left hand. Slides are super easy. They come in measure 15. To slide up, you start on the lower note and you end on the upper note. To slide down, you start on the higher note and you end on the lower note. In the final measure, measure 16, we see that we are going to start learning bends. Now, bends are pretty easy to get the hang of. If you look at these, you're starting on the 7th fret of your string and you're bending it up. You see the arrows going up. Now, how high up you bend it is determined by the number or the fraction that is above the arrow. So above the first base's arrow, you see a 1/2, and that corresponds to the number of half steps that this note is going to bend up. So if we play the 7, a half step up would be an 8. So we need to get it to that pitch. Okay? Now the next 7 for the bass and the first 7 for guitars goes up 1 whole step. So we're starting on that 7 and we're going to bend it all the way up to the 9 because that's 2 half steps or 1 whole step. So we're bending it up 1 whole step. Okay. And guitars, you can see that I wrote in 1.5 steps to bend it up. For that second note, bass players, you can try this. I figured it'd be kind of hard, but guitar players, this is easy. So you're gonna take it and you're gonna bend it up 3 half steps because that's 1.5. 1, 2, 3. So we're trying to bend it here. And that sums up how to read tablature. I think at this point you should know just about all the basics. I realized one thing that I left out was dotted notes. So if you take a look back at measure 3 and you see that whole note there, if you had a dot after it, so if you just had like a little period punctuation mark right after that note, then it extends it by 1/2. So if that's 4 quarters in it, then it extends it to 6. Okay, if it was 4 beats, then it extends it to 6 beats. For the half notes, since they're 2 beats, if you add a dot after them, then that extends it from 2 beats to 3 beats. And I think that is about it. You can also have ties similar to how we did measure 14 for hammer-ons and pull-offs. You can have ties that instead of changing a note, keep it the same. If you have to hold a note through a measure, so say a note started on the 4th beat of a measure and carried on to the next beat of the next measure, so if you held it from 4 to 1, then you would tie those two together. It would be 2 quarter notes and they'd be tied together. But that's some easy stuff, and I'll point it out as we start learning it. Thank you guys for watching. That'll conclude this lesson. So just a review on these 3 videos that were posted today to get everybody jump started. We've got how to pick up your guitar and restring it. You know, if you have an old guitar laying around and some strings and you weren't sure how to do that. The next video was on finger strength, as well as a little bit of fretboard navigation. So it taught you how to put your fingers down on the fretboard, get good sounding notes out of it, followed by how to navigate your way around the fretboard using octaves. And now this final lesson on how to read tablature and a little bit of sheet music, getting rhythms from that. I think you should be good to go with the lessons that I start posting now on scales and chords, and we'll see where we go from there. We'll start to improvise and a bunch of fun stuff. And I think within about a month or two, everybody should be pretty good to go on starting to learn songs on their own. I think this should be a pretty quick little bit of lessons here. So thank you again for watching.